If you want more content from TLDR EU, be sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter. There's a link in the description. Poland is an interesting country when it comes to energy. A country that's trying to shift from the pretty universally disliked coal to controversial nuclear power. So in this video, we'll explain the ambitious plans for this incredibly polluting country, and discuss whether Poland is headed towards a more nuclear future. So, the TLDR of this TLDR video is that Poland is moving towards more nuclear power, because at the moment, Poland relies on coal power for its energy generation. Poland is the 5th largest energy consumer in the EU more generally, and when it comes to coal, they're the 2nd largest consumer after Germany. That's because about 75% of Poland's energy is generated by coal power, with 10% being produced by natural gas and just 15% from renewables. For context, 13% of all European energy was generated by coal in 2020, while renewables accounted for about 38% of total European energy production. Now, Poland's model is obviously bad for the planet. It's no coincidence that Poland has the 2nd highest CO2 emissions per capita in the entire EU. But it's also bad for Poland's public finances and public health. Thanks in part to the EU's carbon credits trading scheme, known as the ETS, coal power generation has become increasingly expensive over recent years. Basically, the ETS puts a cost on the producers of each ton of CO2 released, placing a financial burden on pollution. The ETS was first introduced in 2005, but it didn't make much of a difference until quite recently, when the price of CO2 skyrocketed. Since 2018, the price of a carbon credit for a ton of CO2 has risen by nearly 500%, from about €10 to nearly €60 today. This is mainly because, as governments have upped their climate pledges, investors have taken the idea of carbon credits more seriously. This has made burning coal, which is one of the most CO2-intensive means of energy production, increasingly expensive. And it's only going to get more expensive as well. As part of the EU's new Fit for 55 package, they're planning on expanding the ETS scheme and cutting down the total number of available carbon credits. Poland is also already paying a daily 500,000 ECJ fine to keep their massive coal mine open, which supplies about 70% of the country's electricity. But it's also bad for Poland's public health. In part due to coal, Poland has some of the worst pollution rates in the EU. The European Environment Agency's latest report into air quality shows pollution in almost every part of Poland exceeding European air quality standards. Concentrations of harmful airborne particulates, known as PM10 and PM2.5, were higher in Poland than any other European country, and 38 of the 50 most polluted cities in the European Union were in Poland. And this isn't just unattractive, it's also dangerous. Both PM25 and PM10 are associated with lung damage, heart disease, and cancer. And PM2.5 is specifically associated with emphysema and bronchitis. So, what's the solution to this problem? Well, last year, the Polish government signed off on a plan that would attempt to cut down coal from 75% of energy generation today to at least 28% and possibly as low as 11% in the event of sustained emissions allowance prices. The plan has also involved increasing natural gas to 33% of energy generation by 2040, and renewables are expected to rise from about 15% today to at least 23% by 2030. At the moment, Poland's increase in renewables is being driven by solar. In 2020, Poland reached about 4 gigawatts of installed solar capacity, rising from 1.5 in 2019. That solar domination is largely because, in 2015, the government introduced the 10H rule, which stated that wind turbines had to be at least 10 times the height of the nearest residential building, effectively freezing wind power development in the country. However, perhaps the most interesting part of the plan is that it also involves a massive investment in nuclear power. Poland currently doesn't have any nuclear power plants. It did start building 2 reactors some 80 minutes from Gdansk, but stopped after the 1986 Chernobyl disaster. Nonetheless, the government wants to invest more than 30 billion euros in nuclear power over the next 20 years, with the first nuclear power plant coming online in 2033. The government expects nuclear power to account for 16% of Poland's total energy generation by 2040, generating about 9 gigawatts across 6 reactors. Some commentators have expressed skepticism about the cost of nuclear power. Recent nuclear projects in the US and UK have ended up costing way more than expected and taking far longer than planned. But it's worth noting that nuclear power can be cost effective when part of a long-term government-supported plan. In the 2000s, South Korea's government built out nuclear power reactors at $2 billion per gigawatt of capacity, which is 4 times cheaper than that in the UK and 6 times cheaper than the US. And South Korea was able to build nuclear plants so quickly because the build-out was standardized by the government, which didn't mean endless regulatory investigations or delays. So could Poland follow in this model? Well, the country's nuclear ambitions have been buoyed by plans from a Polish billionaire who controls chemicals producer Synthos SA and Zygmunt Zulunst, the main owner of the country's media and telecommunications giant. And well, he wants to build a bunch of 300 gigawatt mini reactors to replace the coal plant, with them planning to use the GE Hitachi small modular reactor, the BWRX-300. But will this work? Well, there are a couple of problems. The Polish public aren't particularly keen on nuclear. A poll from June found that 39% of Poles were in favour of nuclear power, but 45% were against it. And there are already protests brewing where the first plant is likely to be built. The German government also aren't particularly keen. The chairwoman of the Bundestag Committee on the Environment claimed that in the event of a nuclear accident, there was a 20% chance that Germany would be affected, depending on the weather at the time. According to them, in the worst-case scenario, 1.8 million Germans could be exposed to this radiation, and this could affect Berlin and Hamburg. The Polish authorities deny this, and they say that they've carried out thorough safety checks, but it could still be a point of contention. The final spanner in the works is that Poland no longer have the support of Trump. Trump and Poland had a remarkably chummy relationship, with Trump praising Poland for spending 2% of its gross domestic product on defense, and therefore qualifying as only one of few NATO allies who actually meet the alliance's spending demands. And therefore, Trump even suggested establishing a permanent US military base in Poland. Anyway, even more importantly, in June 2020, Trump promised cooperation on Poland's nuclear program. However, Trump is obviously now gone, and with Biden pretty preoccupied, Poland can no longer count on Trump levels of support. Luckily for them though, France, Europe's biggest nuclear power generator, have stepped in, and on February 2nd, the day the government approved the energy strategy, France's foreign trade minister visited Poland to offer support, and EDF even proposed a deal to fund 2/3 of the project while promoting their European pressurised reactor, a new so-called 4th-generation reactor which is currently used in China. They claim the EPR has a capacity of over 1 gigawatt and is walk-away safe, which essentially means the risk of nuclear accident is nearly zero. Safety aside, this would clearly be a major step for such a coal-using country. So, do you think that Poland is headed towards a more nuclear future? Is it going to help the most polluted country, or is going towards nuclear not really the right solution? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time I release a new video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that is in the description.